5. Imagine having a government that puts the good of their country first. We simply don't. We have a government that, if it had a motto, would be Britain last.
4.
When you do these sharp handbrake turns, I quake. I quake behind my mic.
3.
We've been clever with our money and clever with our freedoms, but they're going to take those freedoms and they will destroy our schools.
2.
Forget about this shindig in Washington, D.C. The really major event of the week was Liam Halligan on the Question Time panel.
1. We have liftoff.
Welcome once again to Planet Normal, the Telegraph podcast with Alison Pearson.
Hello.
And me, Liam Halligan. It's the second coming of the Donald co-pilot, with Trump inaugurated as the 47th President of the United States on Monday, having already held the White House from 2016 to 2020. This time round, Trump's appointed hillbilly offspring turned soldier turned Ivy League man of letters J.D. Vance as his vice president, with Team Trump also featuring other non-conventional political picks, not least your new boyfriend, the man with the proper rocket, Elon Musk. Trump's hit the ground running, signing a flurry of executive orders and presidential pardons, shocking bien pensant liberals, but exhilarating millions of those who someone called Hillary Clinton, remember her, once called the basket of deplorables. You write about Trump in Wednesday's Telegraph, Alison, and you contrast him with Keir Starmer, a man who I think it's fair to say doesn't particularly impress you. Link to that article in the show notes of this episode. You were meant to be recording this episode of Planet Normal from Liverpool, covering the trial of the suspects in the ghastly killing of 3 little girls, all of them Taylor Swift fans. But the suspect unexpectedly and belatedly pleaded guilty, rendering the trial void. And of course, since then, various details about the background of Axel Rudakabana have come to light, which suggests these attacks could well be interpreted as terrorism, something the authorities have consistently denied. But before we get going, Alison, I know you wanted to say something about the glorious news, the release of British-Israeli national Emily Dumari, along with some other hostages held by Hamas. You've got to know Emily's family, and indeed, you predicted her release on last week's Planet Normal.
Yes, it was a bolt of pure joy, Liam. We'd been, I said on the podcast last week, didn't I, that there were these rumblings that some of them might be coming out. I had high hopes that Emily would be, they often release the women or the elderly first, and had high hopes that she's 28, that she would be coming out. I did an interview with her marvellous mother, Mandy, but they've had so many disappointments in the past, Liam. She'd been in there for 471 terrifying days, and she was indeed supposed to be she was on the list to be released November 2023. So it was right up until the nail-biting stuff until finally the word came. And listeners will have seen, I think, both the joy of the reunion of Emily and Daron and Romy with their mothers, who have fought like lionesses for their girls, really, but also seen the horrifying scenes of Hamas swarming over the truck as they were being taken away. But, I've been in touch with them since, and Emily's doing really, really well. And we're hoping, obviously, more hostages will be released this coming weekend. So I think expecting some more young women to come out. But of course, co-pilot, I think...
Oh no, what have I done now? When you do these sharp handbrake turns, I quake. I quake behind my mic. I'm sitting behind my mic with a little kind of crucifix sign made out of my fingers. My shoulders are hunched. What have I done?
Forget about this shindig in Washington, D.C. The really major event of the week, for as far as Planet Normal was concerned, was Liam Halligan on the Question Time panel. Now, I just want to say...
Are you serious?
What have I told you about going back to planet Earth?
It was a rather heated re-entry, can I say?
Will any good come from mixing with those people? I mean, come on.
Come on, it's the BBC Question Time. It's the biggest show on terrestrial television, and I watched it as a kid with Robin Day.
Yes.
And you've done Question Time in the past. I've done Question Time in the past. We're both old hands at it. But come on, it does make the pulse quicken. Theme music is there, and crowd pretends to clap and then practices clapping and then actually claps. And you don't know the questions beforehand. You really don't. At least I didn't.
I have to say, I'm going to confess now, I recorded it and then I fast forwarded it to your bits. Because I literally thought, I'm not sure I can watch all these numpties with their anti-growth, anti-Trump, pro-NHS nonsense. But I thought everyone thought you did absolutely brilliantly. You looked great and you were able to...
That's the main thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the main thing. You know, I did it years ago and I texted my mum and I said, did I do okay? And she said, oh, I love the earrings. You know, I thought this is basically, you can go on and say absolutely anything. People would say, oh, you got a new fringe. But yeah, you did look great. But I thought you really landed some blows. So when the Lib Dem guy, no, I don't think he was Tim, he's probably called Tim, wasn't he?
Callum Miller.
Yes, when Callum was making a Lib Dem point about the evil, interference of Elon Musk on manipulating social media, and the quick as a flash, the co-pilot said, yes, your former Lib Dem leader, Nick Clegg, went to Facebook to do something like that, didn't he? Boom, boom. Absolutely brilliant. And also terrific stuff on the NHS. And I noticed you were raising lots of the things we've talked about many times here, haven't we, on Planet Normal, about the OECD figures about how badly the NHS compares internationally. And I thought you were telling the audience stuff which sadly they don't often get to hear on planet Earth. How did you feel? I mean, did you feel you acquitted yourself well? Or you seemed to get a bit frustrated at times that you were being interrupted?
I did, because the reality is, if you're not one of the sort of main two politicians on the panel, and I suppose this is fair enough, you don't get as much time. I do feel, having been on Question Time, Any Questions, quite a few times over the years, I don't complain about that. They often ask me on, and I've got very good relationships with the producers and the senior bods on both those programs. I do feel I'm sometimes there as a bit of a sort of circus animal to be poked. And I do feel that I'm interrupted a lot more than most, because sometimes I'm saying things which I believe the silent majority of the British public agree with, but they don't necessarily go down particularly well in BBC circles these days. I mean, they used to. I don't think I've changed in particular. I just think the sort of mainstream media establishment has become a lot more judgmental, a lot more woke, for want of a better word. There was quite a lot of hostility towards me, but also a tremendous amount of gratitude shown to me when I pointed out that actually, us talking about Elon Musk's tweets is actually displacement activity, because we should be focusing on the grooming gangs, and we shouldn't be calling them grooming gangs. We should be calling them child rape gangs. And I think we're seeing the same thing now, aren't we, in the wake of Southport? Why is Yvette Cooper going on about the fact that this bloke bought a knife on Amazon, right? I mean, you can go into your mum's kitchen and get a knife, yes? Why blame Amazon? Why not talk about who knew what when, about the background of this young person? I use describing Axel Rudikabana literally. There were clearly aspects of his background that could easily be interpreted as terror related. He had downloaded a Al-Qaeda training manual, had been manufacturing ricin. And yet when people were concerned that this was a terror incident, when the ghastly news came from Southport of the butchering of those 3 precious young girls, people were shouted down. People were told they were wrong. People were, told they were in breach of the law. And yet, how else can you interpret it? And it strikes me that Keir Starmer has been doing everything he can possible to avoid that interpretation, almost to the point of ridiculousness. And so I do think there's a lot of concern out there. And I did feel that the sort of full force of the political and media establishment when I tried to point out that in so many of these ghastly incidents that we've had in our country, displacement activity happens. And, a lot of the audience are smart, and they're thinking that, and they want to hear someone on the television who treats them like adults and says, yes, I think this too. But, you take your professional life in your hands when you point these things out. And I'm sure I'm off quite a few former colleagues' Christmas card list as a result.
How damning is that, Liam? Because we are talking about not just the, Elsie and Alice and BB ages 7, 6 and 9, start of their lives, lovely summer holiday club, absolutely so excited to go there. I've spoken to one of the grandfathers this week, and they were making friendship bracelets when this guy charged in. They thought it was part of the fun initially. They thought this is something funny, something special they've laid on. And then he attacked Leanne, their dance teacher, and then he started basically slashing and killing their classmates. And they didn't cry, Liam. They were petrified with fear, right? So let's just think about that. 8 other little girls, disfigured, absolutely horrendous. And I've always thought that from the get-go, the aim was to downplay it. It should be a notorious massacre, easily up there with something like the murder of Jamie Bulger, even Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. I really think it's on that sort of level. It's absolutely, and the ramifications for the families who were, the person I was talking to was saying that people haven't slept since then. The children are constantly waking in the night. They can't go to school. So they're just massive repercussions. But what we see with this kind of horrific incident is an attempt to deflect from possible terrorist or ideological motives. And in this case, it was particularly ludicrous because I think nearly everybody immediately decided that it clearly was a terrorist attack. And one of the reasons that we saw the social unrest was the lack of information coming from the authorities, and into that silence was allowed to leak all sorts of, speculation. The various senior Labour ministers were saying it was fake news, it was conspiracy theories. I have to say that my source said that amongst the families, Keir Starmer is referred to as 19 seconds. 19 seconds is how much time the Prime Minister gave to going to lay a wreath to the girls in Southport, turned up stony-faced, chucked the wreath down. All the crowd were calling at him saying, why has this happened? What's happened? How many more children have to die, Prime Minister? And the man who said that, I'm told, was one of the granddads. And he couldn't wait to get out of there, Liam. He has shown no leadership. He is incapable of acting as father of the nation on these occasions, as we saw in his absolutely disgustingly disingenuous speech on Monday. So what we're talking about is, as has become, I think, pretty clear this week, despite all the wriggling and trying to get out of it, is a huge cover-up. So in his speech on Monday morning, it was a hastily convened event, wasn't it? And that's because, as you said in the introduction, Radicabana had changed his plea to guilty. So suddenly we were all allowed to do that speculation.
You were literally on the train, weren't you, on the way to court in Liverpool?
I was on the way to court and I was disappointed.
I think it's fair to say you were spitting tacks.
Well, because I'm sure Planet Normal listeners will have felt the same. I know lots of Telegraph readers thought, how are they going to block this, right? We were waiting for them. They didn't want it to go ahead. They don't want the state, the agencies of the state don't want to have it in court, really.
Because all the details would have come out, right?
All the details would have come
Background, cross-examination, all the rest of it.
Absolutely, not just the details, the fact that these people came from Rwanda, why were they offered refugee status, and so on. So all these rumours that have been swirling around, lots and lots of rumours. And these rumours, of course, have caused a very, very toxic situation. So there's a couple of things to point out, Liam. Starmer was trying to get on the front foot. And in his speech, he made a number of completely preposterous claims. First of all, he had, for a long time, as the police had said, had denied it was a terror attack. The Telegraph's had a very interesting story saying the police were keen to disclose more, but the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, you'll remember, Liam, that Starmer himself had been a former Director of Public Prosecutions. They had said, no, you're not allowed to say anything. So in this entirely disingenuous speech on Monday, Starmer was basically saying, no, I couldn't possibly say anything because that would have derailed the trial and I would have let down Elsie and Bibi and Alice. Utterly morally disgusting to use those children as a kind of emotional leverage for the fact that he chose. And then he said, which has now been entirely exposed as fatuous, he said, oh, of course, well, it wasn't that kind of terrorism. It's a new kind of terrorism, one I've just made up. And the new kind of terrorism is these lone, self-radicalized people, in their bedrooms who get radicalized online. Now, I could give you a list, Liam, of lone self-radicalized terrorists, the Westminster Bridge attacker, the murder of Sir David Amis, the murder of Joe Cox, on and on. His own director of terrorism, Jonathan Hall, had said not only that people quite reasonably want to know as much as possible about a massacre of children. Jonathan Hall also said that trial judges are very, very good at directing the jury to just focus on what they hear in the courtroom. So Starmer has been caught out, and he is happily now pointing to the failure of state agencies like the Prevent Counter-Terrorism Unit to distract from the culpability of the government. And what we see, Liam, is a two-tier system. When we saw the so-called Southport riots and riots around the country, Starmer was extremely quick to call them far-right thugs, to say they were going to suffer the most severe punishment. This was before some of them had been charged, let alone put on trial.
So their background was completely disclosed.
Yes. So it's essentially, if you're a white working class person who doesn't think it's very nice that little girls are being killed in huge numbers, the Prime Minister can prejudice your trial, but he's not going to prejudice this trial. And I do think, looking at the picture they've released this week of Ruda, I mean, we live in a sort of secular liberal society, but there is such a thing as evil, Liam. And that boy is evil. And I just want to finish by saying that the Prevent was alerted 3 times about Ruda Cabana and didn't take things any further. The report into Prevent by Sir William Shawcross found that post Michael Gove, there was a very, very strong woke surge in Prevent, very, very keen to make out that there was as much far-right terrorism as there was Islamist terrorism in the UK, which is complete nonsense. It's hugely disproportionate, the attacks from Islamist terrorism. So we've got that to take into account. And for me, this Southport attacks has always been about the vilest misogyny. I believe the Taylor Swift holiday club was targeted because it was Western little girls. It was the period of the Taylor Swift tour, you'll remember, through Europe. And there was a threatened attack on Taylor Swift concerts in Austria, and that was called off because of the terrorist threat. So I think this is a pretty disgusting cover-up. I actually think Keir Starmer should resign, but no chance of that. Sorry, that's a bit of a tirade, but it really has affected me. And as you know, today, when Planet Normal goes out, I will hopefully be in the court in Liverpool for the sentencing and be able to look on that creature.
I think it's also worth saying, Alison, before we move on to just some comments on the Trump presidency, what it could mean for the UK and the world, and indeed for America itself. And without getting sort of too much into the weeds of the sausage machine behind British journalism, it was odd to me that Starmer had given this speech and a lot of very forensic people were saying things that were deeply unhelpful to the government. The words in particular from Jonathan Hall you mentioned, he is the UK's own terrorist threat advisor. And he was raising eyebrows, KC eyebrows, very much part of the judicial establishment. And then suddenly, as if from nowhere in the early evening, there's an non-announcement about Heathrow Airport. And suddenly, Chancellor Rachel Reeves may or may not give a speech in a few weeks' time in which she may or may not say that the third runway at Heathrow is going to get the go-ahead. Really odd, I would say, news management by the centre. Call me Cynical? I wouldn't. I'd call me skeptical and somebody who's watched governments of all stripes at the highest level for 3 decades. That did strike me as really, really strange. But let's move on.
Let's just finish with the point that the government really dragging its feet over a national inquiry into the child rape gangs, which may have affected up to 250,000 British white working class girls, but quickly announcing a national public inquiry into Southport to, again, if we were being sceptical, I think we're conspiracy theorists, Liam, aren't we? Call us a conspiracy theorist, but I think a public inquiry into Southport neatly means that Starmer can say every time he's asked, let's leave that to the public inquiry.
Absolutely. So how did you feel when you watched the Donald's inauguration speech? Were you direct messaging Elon Musk?
Well, look, at one level, it's absolutely, there's a kind of hilarious bombast, isn't there?
Village people,
I know.
There wasn't the guy with a screwdriver in his mouth.
And the guy in full American Indian dress. I mean, I think until Monday at 11 a.m. that was illegal, wasn't it, really? He was identifying as an American Indian rather than allowed to be one. If you remember the first time round when Trump was becoming the 45th president rather than the 47th president, I mean, there was massive protests, weren't there? A lot of anger, marching, dreadful, this awful man. It's a very different tone this time, I think. I think he's come in very determined to get things done. Oh, yes, there was a very lovely moment where Trump said that he promised to put a man on Mars, and basically everyone on social media said, please, can that man be Keir Starmer? which I thought was good. But I think that whatever one's feelings about him are as a man, I think that it's quite extraordinary, this flurry of executive orders which you mentioned, and I think he's showing that all the things a lot of us say over here, could we possibly control our borders? Could we stop pursuing net zero and actually use some of our own energy reserves to make life more affordable for ordinary people? Could we stop with the diversity, equity and inclusion stuff which makes for a more unhappy society? And on and on. And in fact, he's come in and he's sort of nailing them one by one, isn't he, Liam? I mean, first 24 hours, executive orders banning net zero, cheap energy, drill, baby, drill, no more open borders, shutting all these DEI departments. And for me, quite extraordinary, this statement that you were only going to be allowed to say there were 2 genders. No longer were schools going to be able to put about the sort of wilder shores of Democrat progressive thought. So I felt a bit of envy, and I that's what I've written about in my column this week, saying, should we become the 51st state of the United States? What did you think?
It's worth saying that these executive orders, which he was literally signing ostentatiously on the way to the White House, and the little kind of stubby black felt Sharpie pens that he was signing the orders with, he was throwing them to the crowd like a sort of pop rock icon. He certainly knows all about showbiz, which is hardly surprising given the way he came to national prominence was as, the front man of an incredibly popular television show. It strikes me that these executive orders, though, are not a done deal. They can be overturned in the courts. They can be contested. I do think we're going to get a wave now, a wall, if you like, of Democrat-led lawfare, where the courts are brought into the political realm front and centre to try and stop what Donald Trump is doing. I also think, though, at the moment, he looks as if he, is peerless, completely unchallengeable, having won the popular vote, having won a House, having won the Senate, having won, in all the swing states, the 7 or 8 swing states, which he loves reeling off. The Republicans actually have only got a very narrow majority in the House, and you have those congressional midterms in the US. American politics is absolutely relentless. They're in 18 months' time. Within 6 months, it will be the beginning of the run-up to the congressional midterms. If they lose the House, then who knows? But it's certainly not beyond the realms of possibility. Then Trump's wings will be clipped quite considerably. So he's going to feel he's got 18 months now max to really push home his agenda. A colleague of ours on the Telegraph said to us, Alison, earlier that what's really striking about Trump, whatever you think of him, is he's actually got a plan. He's actually got a plan, and that will appeal to even people who he doesn't necessarily appeal to. There'll be some sense of admiration that he's thought about what he wants to do. He's assembled a team that he believes can do it, and a lot of people outside believe he can do it. He's, through a combination of political guile, raw power, and canny politics, he's got a load of people on side who detested him openly when he was first elected, not least all the tech bros. Mark Zuckerberg, how did he feel standing there next to Donald Trump during the inauguration, and so on. And I do think that his example, if you like, whatever kind of an example it is going to cross the pond, as we say. I do think Trump being in office, generating razzmatazz at a time when the US has got 2.7% growth. Britain has no growth. We've just had some budget figures out showing that the budget deficit in December, Alison, was 10 billion quid more than it was in December 2023. 18 billion pound deficit in 1 month. The government borrows 18 billion pounds in the single month of December. That's equivalent, Alison, to the revenues for a whole year if you put about 2.5p on the basic rate of income tax. It's a serious amount of money. We're borrowing that. That's extra borrowing in 1 single month. And of course, the hiring figures are bad. There are 47,000 fewer people on payroll now over the last month, even before these Rachel Reeves tax rises come in, not least the 25 billion quid on employer national insurance. So there will be a sense of economic dynamism in Trump's America. I don't think he's going to fully go ahead with the mooted tariffs. I do think there'll be some tariffs imposed with taxes on exports, of course, from third countries on the Canadians and the Mexicans, in order for the Canadians and the Mexicans to be press ganged into helping America secure its borders. I think what that's about. I do think there'll be some small addition to tariffs on China. Tariffs on China are already somewhere between 10 and 25%, depending on the category of goods. So I do think the tariffs will be less anti-growth than people fear. And I think the kind of buzz that Trump is going to create will engender some dynamism into the American economy. And, meanwhile, Europe, as our colleague Jeremy Warner's written in today's paper, Wednesday's Telegraph, Europe is going to look really, really lackluster, not just economically, but, politically, if you like, and in terms of energy. And I wonder the extent to which what's going on in Trump's America, the fact he has got such broad support across all kinds of parts of the population who didn't vote for him last time, the fact that there are quite a lot of people in this country who silently support him and cheer him on. What's that going to do to British politics? Is that going to open up some room on the right for the Tories to move into? Is it going to make it less difficult for Kemi Badenoch to challenge Nigel Farage? We shall see. But, it's certainly not going to be boring.
No, I think it's certainly good news for reform. I really do. And I think also, I think we'll be like kind of those benighted souls behind the Iron Curtain, peering out at this sort of country, this great nation that's going gangbusters. Liam, I think that, hearing somebody say America first, imagine having a government that puts the good of their country first. We simply don't. We have a government that, if it had a motto, would be Britain last. I think we are increasingly run by activist lawyers who use the taxes of ordinary people to fund progressive projects with which very few people agree, to pay reparations for these imaginary sins of the past. I mean, you'll think about Miliband forking out 11.6 billion in overseas climate aid, whatever that is, us paying Mauritius to take the Chagos Islands off us. And, that is an idea so crazy. And the hope, as with many things now, is that President Trump, has arrived in time to slap it down. My own sense, my suspicion, is this is going to be very, very uncomfortable for Keir Starmer's government. They didn't think he'd ever be re-elected. So lots of them, Lammy, Rayner, are on the record as saying He's racist. Lamy called him a Nazi sympathiser. He's now our foreign secretary. It's interesting that nobody in the Labour government was invited to the inauguration. People like Kate Hoey, Farage, obviously, different people, Lawrence Fox, lots of people on the right in our country were invited and were being made to feel very welcome with this new administration. And it's just a fact that Britain has no influence now with the Trump administration. And there was one really telling detail, Liam, I don't know if you saw it, was that the British Embassy in Washington held an inauguration party and no member of Team Trump turned up. So we are Billy No Mates now over there. And that could potentially be a very, very chilly place to be. I know Trump has huge affection. He obviously had huge affection for the late Queen. He has, a fondness for Britain based on his mother being Scottish. But I think we are so ideologically opposed. Our country is basically now a socialist country, and America is capitalism red in tooth and claw. Whatever you think about that, the gap between us is very, very wide. And I don't know. I think it's going to be very interesting, and I do think it may well open people's minds over here if we see them doing super well and getting rid of all the woke baggage. Let's see how it plays out. It's going to be fascinating.
Today's Planet Normal stowaway is Katherine Birbalsingh, a British teacher and education reform advocate. Katherine was the founder and is the head teacher of Michaela Community School, an academy funded by the state but free from local authority control in Wembley, northwest London. Known as Britain's strictest headmistress, Katherine Birbalsingh has helped drive nothing short of an education revolution in the UK. Her own school produces quite astonishing results, with exam outcomes which almost the entire independent education sector could only dream of. Around 80% of secondary and 40% of primary schools in England have chosen academy status. And as a result, international rankings of children's reading and mathematical ability have shot up, in stark contrast to other parts of the UK where there are no academy state schools. Birbalsingh was born in New Zealand and raised in Canada until she was 15. She studied French and philosophy at New College, Oxford, before going on to teach in state schools in South London. Taking advantage of education reforms which began under New Labour but were spearheaded by Michael Gove, she founded Michaela School in 2014, and the school's performance has literally made headlines around the world. Katherine Birbalsingh, thanks so much for joining us on Planet Normal. What provoked you to write this pretty stiff letter to the Education Secretary?
Well, I'm just very worried about what will happen to education, to all our schools. The big revolution that happened over the time that the Tories were in power, and I need to make clear I'm not a Conservative. I didn't vote for the Conservatives in the last election, but credit where it's due. They did a brilliant job with schools, while I think they were very disastrous in various other ways. Internationally, the league tables, we moved, for instance, in maths over their time from 21st internationally to 7th. We are now considered, having been terrible at reading before, we are now considered to be the best country in the Western world for reading, according to PEARLS and PISA international testings. So the proof is there. You can also just see it on the ground if you anecdotally go to various different schools, various academies and free schools that have used the freedoms that they were given to do what was best for their particular intakes and the challenges that they are up against, has enabled us to do an extraordinary job on the ground. And I'm very worried that politicians who really have no idea and are perhaps ideological in their approach come along and think, oh no, what we need to do is change it all back to what it was. And that will destroy the progress that we have made over the last decade or so.
Just for people who don't follow the education debate very closely, perhaps it's a number of years since they were in education or their children were in education. Just describe to us, Katherine, if you will, what is an academy school? Who pays for an academy school? Why are academy schools clearly, according to international evidence, so successful?
Well, they're just normal schools, actually. But the big difference is that they are not beholden to a local authority. And there will be an academy chain. So there's ARC academies or there's Harris, and there'll be somewhere between 25 and 50 schools, let's say, that belong in their little family. And it means that they have experts, not just people in a local authority who don't know about schools. They have experts who are running their chain, who are making sure that they're bringing the curriculum in line across their schools, for instance, or they are being inspired with training that's coming from people who actually know what they're doing. And so that's how academies work. The money goes directly to the academy chain, and they are then able to use it. You see, they have the freedom to decide what they're going to do. So one of the big problems with the bill that is being put through now, the well-being bill by the Secretary of State, is that they want to take away academies' freedoms to be able to pay their teachers as they would like. Many academy chains pay their teachers more. They make savings in the back offices and various ways because they don't just have one school. They have several schools, you see, and dozens of schools in some cases. And then they make those savings and then they push that money back to their staff, and they do not follow national pay scales. By not following national pay scales, they are able to hold on to their good staff, and the recruitment and retention problem, which is still big, and the Conservatives never managed to deal with the recruitment and retention problem, and is the sort of thing that Bridget Philipson should be addressing. If she takes away the freedoms that the academies have to be able to not follow the national pay scales, then the academies will be at a loss for being able to hold on to those staff. I also just think if teachers were clear about the fact that she was threatening their pay, they would be they would be up in arms, but they just don't know what's in the bill.
Now, you are the head of the Michaela School in Wembley in northwest London. I happen to have grown up just around the corner from the Michaela School. I know the area very, very well. It's not by any means a wealthy area at all. In fact, there are pockets of real deprivation in that part of northwest London. The Michaela School really has been the focus of not just national, but international attention. You've had so many people heaping praise on yourself. I know you're a very modest person. That's not what it's about for you, but particularly on your school and the performance of your pupils. You're a non-selective school and you get astonishing academic results. Just tell us a little bit about those academic results and tell us a little about the background of the children who are in your school.
Yeah, so we have a typical inner city intake, loads of ethnic minority kids, working class kids, just a standard inner city intake. We get 800 visitors from around the world, mainly teachers, who come to visit us to see what we do.
Per year?
Yeah, every year.
Astonishing.
We've had over 7,000 visitors visit the school since we opened, and we have a whole system where they go around and have lunch with the kids and they have a tour with the kids. And all of your listeners, all they need to do is sign up on the website. You can come and see what we do. Everyone is always blown away by what they see because it's not just that we get these amazing results. So our results, the last 3 years in the country, we have had the highest progress in the country, and it's never been done before. We've actually challenged Eton in terms of the results that we get, and people can't believe what they're seeing. And the social mobility, of course, that is enabled by our school is extraordinary. Now, that's just the results, but it's also the case that our children, they're just so polite, they're so well behaved. I've had various head teachers from private schools who come who are slightly embarrassed because they say to me, my children do not behave like your children do. Now, how have we managed to do that? Because we have used the freedoms that we have been given, which will now be taken away by this current Secretary of State to do what is best for our intake. The thing that she doesn't understand is that all schools are not the same. We all have different intakes. We have different buildings. We have different staff recruitment and retention problems. We have a whole variety we have different yard spaces. We have to do what is right and best for our pupils. And if they are tying our hands behind our backs as head teachers and stopping us from being able to have that freedom to do what's best, she can't know what's best. She's in Whitehall. We, on the other hand, are on the ground. What does she know what's happening to schools in Hull or schools in the Cotswolds in comparison to schools in the inner city in Wembley? They're all completely different. Now, yes, there are some things that we all have in common. And yes, kids are kids. Having said that, when you are trying to make a success with a relatively small budget in comparison to what the private schools have, I have £7,000 a year per child. They have got somewhere between 27,000 to 50,000. Eton has £50,000 per child. Well, okay, then how come we're able to challenge them on their results? Because we've been clever with our money and clever with our freedoms, but they're going to take those freedoms and they will destroy our schools.
Just before we get onto the detail of the Labour legislation that you feel is threatening academy schools, legislation that's currently going through Parliament, just tell us briefly a little bit about you, Katherine, and how difficult it was to set up Michaela School back in 2014.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, because the idea of free schools was a conservative idea, it was a conservative project, those on the left were very angry about it and tried to stop free schools from opening. So while we should have opened in a year, because I had spoken at the Conservative Party conference in 2010, we attracted a lot of detractors who were determined to stop us from opening. So it actually took us 3.5 years. And while the idea came to me in late 2010, we did not open until September 2014. And we moved 3 different boroughs trying to find a building. Our detractors were very good at stopping us.
Sounds really tribal.
Well, yes. And for instance, I would go to Brixton Market. I would give out flyers about our schools to a lot of black mums, ordinary black mums, just looking for another choice of school. The mums would come to, for instance, we had an event in a pub in Camberwell to tell them about the school. A whole load of people who don't live in London were bussed in by, extreme lefties who would stand outside with placards calling me Tory teacher and insulting us. We had to hire bouncers because of the possible violence that might ensue. And then when we would talk to, when I say we, me and my steering group, when we would talk to the mums from Brixton Market, ordinary families, to tell them about the school, these people would stand up and shout to drown us out so that the mums could not hear the information that they needed to be able to find out about the school.
And tell us how popular your school is with local families. Of course, you're talking there about Brixton Camberwell. That's in South London. For people in other parts of the country who don't know the capital as well as you and I, Wembley obviously is in northwest London. How popular is your school that so many people did so much to try to prevent being set up?
Well, I mean, it's very popular. Loads of families want to go. Obviously, we've had the best progress in the country for 3 years. We get kids with so many grade 9s, which is the top grade at GCSE. 50% of our exams last year were graded 9. 5% across the country get 9s. We had 50%. I mean, it is astounding.
With a non-selective intake from an area that's extremely, I say this as a son of the neighbourhood, an area that is socioeconomically extremely mixed.
Yeah, I mean, that's people come and they can't believe what they see, how much our kids know, how driven they are, how resilient they are. They've all got these ambitions about what they're going to do with their lives, but also how kind they are and how grateful they are for whatever it is they've got in life, and how they have a sense of duty towards others and how they're willing to make sacrifices to help other people. Honestly, it is really very inspirational, and your listeners would be welcome to come and see us to see what is possible when we are allowed to do what we know is best for our intakes. And this is where I fear the government will take from us. And as you say, the bill is currently going through Parliament. And because Labour have a majority, unless Labour have second thoughts about it, and, it's possible. I know these things are done very quickly. Bills get written up, and then people don't, politicians are very busy. They don't necessarily realize what is in there. And so I'm hoping that they will row back on some of it so that the great successes that were made with education, proven by the international league tables, we can continue to build on in the country.
I think it's worth pointing out to people not watching the debate very closely that academy schools really are a phenomenon. I think I'm right in saying that 70 or 80% of state secondaries are now academy status, having chosen to free themselves from local authority control. Around 40% of primary schools are academies. Tell us what this bill will do to your ability, aside from your ability to pay particular teachers who you want to retain more money, using your budget, managing your budget in a smart way. To what extent does this threaten to even not just stop, but reverse the academy revolution that's been so successful in terms of outcomes for kids?
Yeah, so a great example is uniform, for instance, which seems insignificant. And if you're not on the ground, you don't understand how important uniform is to creating a sense of team and belonging, and how uniform in many ways can keep children in the inner city off the streets. So, what do I mean? The England football team, when they go out to play, they all wear the same shirt so that when you see them across the pitch, you can pass because you immediately just see the shirt. You're not seeing necessarily the details of the person. Now, similarly, when our children wear their Michaela bag and the logo's on the back of it, and it's on their backs, and they're getting on the buses down the street, and they're way away, far away, we can see that it's one of our pupils. And we can see if he's in trouble, if he's being hassled by somebody. We can see if he's misbehaving and not doing what he should when he's getting on the buses. So it enables us to look after our children when they're out on the streets. Their blazer, their ties. Lots of schools use ties to denote prefects and future leaders and so on. Bridget Philipson, looking at this in a manner that is just not very informed, she thinks, well, it's not fair to ask families to buy branded items, so I'm going to reduce your ability to, as a school, to ask for branded items. Now, I have to say, I share her worries around not wanting families to spend that much money. Our families are poor. So I do my very best to keep it to a minimum while also making sure that I am supporting our children to belong here, and I am fighting the street in the way that I need to in the inner city. Now, if you're a school in the Cotswolds, you're not going to have the same problems. So you might not need the various uniform items branded that I need branded. So you see, here's an example where you can't just have one rule for all. She's coming down from Whitehall and saying, now look at this. I know better. All the schools are the same, and I am going to make it so that you all have to follow the exact same rules. Well, if she does that, my children become unsafe, and the children in the Cotswolds perhaps will be okay. And the thing is, she genuinely, I don't think she wants to harm poor children. I don't think she wants to harm disadvantaged children. She thinks that she is helping them in this case. What she doesn't realize is that we all care about disadvantaged children. I've spent my whole life, over 25 years, working with them and have dedicated my life to disadvantaged children, and I've only ever worked in the inner city. So I have the badge to prove that I'm very much interested in disadvantaged children, and I enable social mobility for them here at Michaela in a very successful way. So I know things that the Secretary of State does not know. She will know all kinds of things I don't know about politics, and that's fine. I'm just saying I know what I do, my business, very well. Now, because I care about disadvantaged families, we have a whole system here which enables children, when they grow out of their uniforms, to bring them in and donate them so that we can get them dry cleaned and sell them secondhand at a fraction of the cost, so that all families can be supported with making sure that they are wearing the uniform properly. And it's one of the things that's so admirable when you come to the school. You see our kids, they look so smart and they feel smart, and their self-esteem and how smart they feel, gosh, it's palpable when you're in the building. You have to come here to see it. Now, while we've had over 7,000 visitors, yes, that's true, but I haven't had millions. Obviously we're just a school. And so ordinary people out there who don't understand how to run a school and what's important to running a good school won't understand these details, and I don't blame them. I don't know how to do their jobs either. And so the fact is, this bill will end up being pushed through by politicians who are ill-informed and don't understand what schools need on the ground, and we will be prevented from doing what is right for our children.
A lot of people are accusing Bridget Philipson of putting ideology, leftist ideology, statist ideology ahead of the welfare of kids. People are accusing her also, Katherine Birbalsingh, of wanting to protect underperforming teachers. What do you make of those two charges?
I don't know what she wants with the underperforming teachers, actually. That's an interesting point. But I do see a sense of Marxism that is coursing through the veins of the bill. You see her Marxist outlook in every decision that she's making. And what do I mean by Marxist outlook? They want equity. They want equality of outcomes. And the thing is, school is very much a meritocratic environment where you should be rewarding the children who have worked hard for their test and done well in it. And you should be, ticking off the naughty children who have not done their work for that test. If, on the other hand, it's prizes for all and you have equality of outcome, then it ruins and destroys the motivation that each individual child needs to be able to achieve in life. And social mobility is not something that you can just place upon children. You need to inspire them to take ownership of their own lives and jump over the obstacles that are in front of them. I would never deny that my children have more obstacles in front of them than, say, the boys at Eton. However, in order to jump over those obstacles and compete with the boys at Eton, they need to behave in certain ways. They need to feel like they belong to their school and wear their uniform well. They need to work really hard so that they can get grades at GCSE that will compete with the boys at Eton. They need to own their lives and push themselves forward. It's about self-empowerment. It is not about holding your hand out to the state and say, please give me more massa. And that is unfortunately what a Marxist view will do when you are saying that you want equalities of outcome. We know better as the bureaucrats and the politicians, and we're going to force that equality on top of you. True equality and true success is not found by imposing it on people. People need to be inspired and supported and scaffolded so that they can meet. Oh, I'm sorry, those are our pips at school.
Finally, Katherine, have you heard from Bridget Philipson? You wrote to her just over a week ago.
Yes, I have heard, and I've been invited to the Department for Education for a meeting.
We look forward to hearing about that.
Okay.
Katherine Birbalsingh, thanks so much for appearing on Planet Normal.
Thanks for having me.
Well, there you have it, Alison. Katherine Birbalsingh, you'll notice when I asked her to talk a little bit about herself, she just dodges the question. That's not what she's about. It must take enormous self-belief and indeed ego, as we've discussed, to do what she's done, to found a school in the teeth of huge local political opposition and to dedicate herself the way she has for so many years. Straight out of Oxford, world at her feet, she went straight into teaching in state schools in the inner city, and that's dominated her entire professional life. So she wrote this letter to Bridget Philipson about Labour's child wellbeing and schools bill that's going through the Commons. Interesting, I'd not heard that before, that Bridget Philipson, Education Secretary, has agreed to see her. It really is an astonishing letter. Planet Normal listeners can find it easily online by just searching Katherine Birbalsingh's name and the name of the Education Secretary. We should say, in fairness, of course, that the Department for Education, the government source says the last 14 years have seen outcomes for disadvantaged children go backwards, with growing attainment gaps and more children persistently absent from school. Labour ministers have also said that they believe that uniform outfitters have, quotes, fleeced parents and families for too long, and we're cracking down on that after years of inaction by the Tories. Clearly, education is an extremely contested area in the UK. Still, it strikes me that Katherine Birbalsingh's views, her way of driving education, it's almost as if the education establishment is still trying to quarantine her, even though academy schools are so widespread now, but only in England. This is only an English phenomenon. The devolved assemblies, of course, have their own direction over education. I wonder how the Education Secretary is going to play this, because these academy reforms, they really are. Gove obviously spearheaded them, as we said, but there's a lot of Labour figures who really back academy schools, not least Tony Blair, not least people like Andrew Adonis, more technocratic former ministers. And I think it's going to be a major battlefield going forward, as if our kids' education hasn't been disrupted enough in recent years.
Well, I'd love to be a fly on the wall when Bridget Philipson
Can you imagine?
She's like one of those Harry Potter letters that arrives in a sort of flurry of birds of prey, isn't she? It's just vomp. It's a fantastic letter.
It'd be like a lioness sort of pacing around a hyena, and Bridget Philipson, she ain't the lioness.
She certainly isn't. And it's a great letter with the refrain running through it. It's a beautiful rhetorical device. What problem is the Education Secretary trying to solve, she asks, as she lists these totally futile things. I thought it was just an absolutely fascinating interview. I mean, she's another, after Ayaan Hirsi Ali last week, we're getting these absolutely astonishing women, aren't we, Liam? And I can remember when Katherine Birbalsingh first burst onto the scene, she was standing up for standards, for discipline, for respect, for all the things that used to be completely uncontroversial, certainly when our parents were at school, and which fell out of fashion and then saw some of the most disadvantaged children in the country become more and more disadvantaged because they weren't being held to those standards. And I've often referenced my own native Wales here, Liam, which, as you say, has got control of its own education system, which has gone from doing extremely well in those PISA rankings. Wales used to be the highest performing country in the United Kingdom, and since Labour took over has just seen tragic decline. So that's what the Bridget Philipson class, I thought that Catherine's use of Marxist was absolutely correct. And let's remind ourselves that in the House of Commons, when Michaela, again for another year, came up with these amazing exam results, Bridget Philipson was invited to congratulate Katherine Birbalsingh and her school, and gracelessly she refused and just muttered something.
50% of GCSEs at grade 9, a non-selective school. Absolutely astonishing.
It's ironic, isn't it, that these should be Labour's kids, shouldn't they? As
Yeah.
Katherine described them in the part of London where you grew up. Absolutely. It's not selective. To get those results from selective children would be really good. To get them from non-selective, children who aren't all that academic is just incredible. And Michaela is sending A-level students to some of the best universities in the country. Absolutely is one of the sort of success stories that our country should be celebrating. But I see that Kemi Badenoch has just said that the Education Secretary is letting trade unions run her department. And that's what's happening, isn't it, Liam?
I do think there's an element of that with the best will in the world. I do think education policy is extremely tribal. I do think the ideas of Katherine Birbalsingh and other education reformers who have now years of demonstrable success on their side, I do think their views are being hammered back in their box by Labour's political machine. And I don't think parents are going to like it. I don't think it's going to do Labour any favours at all with the electorate. And as I say, this school it's literally used to be on my paper round when I was a kid. The area I grew up in, it is not an economically prosperous area at all. And I'm just completely blown away by these results. And it'd be very interesting to see how Bridget Philipson handles the phenomenon that is Katherine Birbalsingh. Now on to our listener emails. Your messages sent to planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk. Please keep them coming. We learn so much from you, the citizens of Planet Normal.
We had a huge number of emails in response to the interview with Ayaan Hirsi Ali. And we also had lots about the co-pilot's appearance and the madness of planet Earth, that is BBC Question Time. Mary says, what a rocket-fueled interview. Thank you, Alison and Liam. Ayaan Hirsi Ali is staggeringly courageous, and so admiring am I that I went straight out and bought her book, Pray, which is incisive and chilling in equal measure. She talks about the religious fanatics who come to Europe and the UK so they can use the freedoms that gave them sanctuary to spread a vile and fundamentalist version of Islam. So well versed are they in how our law and systems work that they manipulate it to their advantage. Many on those boatloads of men do not want to assimilate into our culture or value system. Quite the contrary. And please, no bleeding hearts here. It is not discrimination that's holding back integration. Simply put, says Mary, it's their loathing of women as mere subordinates. They reject the equalities that are supposed to be our core values. What plays out in many of our cities and towns is radical Islam, which gives men religious authority to control women and license to abuse those women. This is why there are rape gangs. This is why the little angels were horrifically murdered in Southport. It's all part of the same paradigm. Our institutions, justice system and liberal progressives have created this monster. These radical men don't fear any of us. The sanctions are meaningless, and women here have been downgraded in their own lifetime. I want answers and action, says Mary, not piffling woke language from our impotent government. Please, both of you, keep up your amazing work. And she says, from one warrior woman to another. I think Halligan counts as a warrior woman.
Can I be an honorary warrior woman?
You are an honorary, you are, we see you. And Sheila says, I am sure I'm just one of the many people who found your interview with Aaron Hersey Ali extremely moving and insightful. It gave me a light bulb moment of what is really going on in our society, enabling me to understand all the different parts which are coming together to destroy us if we are not careful. For some time now, I've felt very upset and I must say a bit frightened about what is happening politically and socially. It's obvious we need to get rid of our far left government, deport many of our illegals as soon as possible. 4 years may be too late. Thank you, says Sheila, for bringing this very educated, intelligent lady to our attention. I have forwarded the interview to many of my friends as I think it is so important. Keep up the good work, please.
This is from Paula. Dear Liam and Alison, never full stop, have full stop, we full stop, needed full stop, you full stop, more, exclamation mark. Send help. Can't wait till the next episode. No pressure. Lots of love to you both. I'm reading out these emails. This is literally a reflection of the emails that we've had this week. It's not just all patting ourselves on the back. We just had so many. Dear Alison and Liam, thank you for your courage, wit and intelligence. Must be talking about you, Alison. In pushing back on the current dystopian rhetoric, it's immensely comforting to know there are others that also believe we are living through concerning times and who aren't afraid to speak out. Best regards from David. And Julie says, just a quick note to plead for 2 or 3 Planet Normal podcasts per week. Crikey, Alison, we'd kill each other. I'm so addicted to finally being able to listen to intellectual deep dives into current events and Liam's amazing ability to explain and link the complex economic government decisions to world events to their impact on our daily world. In my fantasy world, Liam, you would be our Chancellor, and Alison would do a much better job at the Home Office, education, health, etc. But especially, she would make an absolutely amazing Prime Minister. Can you imagine? Who would play you in the movie? It wouldn't be you being Renée Zellweger. It'd be Renée Zellweger being you. Planet Normal's superb, says Julie. The best podcast of all, and we need more rocket launches. Thank you so much for all your hard work. Well, thank you so much to all of you. Alison and I do really, really appreciate all the warmth and gratitude that we get back from our wonderful Planet Normal listeners.
Absolutely. And we don't write these. They all come in. Shoals of them come in. Gary says, Dear Liam and Alison, I hope this finds you both in fine fettle. But since last week, I fear for Liam. Oh. It was great to see him on BBC Question Time and putting up a fine defence for the points of view of us Planet Normal inhabitants against a left-sided gang of 4 others. However, those others seem to be well supplemented by certain members of the audience who are clearly there to heckle and harass and not listen to reasoned thinking. There was one gentleman, if you can call him that, said Gary, in particular, that was very much in Liam's face in seeking answers on how to generate growth. He didn't seem to want to listen, and there was a brief moment where it looked like Liam had to take a sharp intake of breath to maintain his equilibrium. He's got a lot of practice doing that, Gary, on Planet Normal.
Working with you.
Working with me, yeah. We felt for him. Well done, Liam, for keeping your composure in the face of such provocation. You must have felt like the only Planet Normal resident in the room. In a nod to Bob the Bard, says Gary, here goes. There was once a man called Liam who with Alison started Planet Normal when we needed him. Reasoned views are not a crime, even on Question Time when explaining why things are so grim. My wife and I, says Gary, have never missed an episode since the start and look forward to our weekly hour of sanity in this ever maddening world. Very best wishes to you both. Right, we like this one. Listen to how he addresses us, Halligan. Bob says, Dear Alison, Professor Emeritus in Economics, and Liam, Alison's promising student. My husband actually said this week, Alison identifies as an economist, which I think that's now legitimate, isn't it?
That was you. That wasn't Bob, that bit.
You can be anything you want to be. I'm identifying. Wow, says Bob. 2 great podcasts to start 2025 and a lesson in economics that should be compulsory listening for Rachel in accounts, although I'm not sure that Rachel and her team's bandwidth is sufficient for them to comprehend the significance of the bond markets and their effect on the economy. Andrew Lillico's effective takedown of those the Bank of England who lied about Liz Truss's mini budget, which many of us agreed was a good thing. You might be right, Liam, that ignoring the OBR was a mistake, but as history shows, they're not brilliant at forecasting, so maybe she had a point. Congratulations, Liam, says Bob, on your excellent contribution to Question Time. The look on Fiona Bruce's face, akin to the proverbial bulldog licking pee off a nettle, was worth a second look on iPlayer. It's a shame that the left's obsession with Elon Musk clouds their judgment, and as you said, their displacement activity in an attempt to deflect from the government's failure when it comes to the mainly Pakistani child rape gangs. I'm not surprised at the interruptions to your home truths about the economy when you are faced with an audience that is representative of the electoral split of the country, who were nakedly lefty. On the subject of your book, Home Truths, have you given Angela Rayner a copy? She might then understand that her promises on house building are totally spurious. Alison, a great interview with Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She is a fantastic woman, deserving of greater recognition. Keep the rocket going in the right direction.
And that's it from Planet Normal for another week. We don't usually read out so many emails in praise of ourselves, but we've literally had a tsunami of them. Not just for my appearance on Question Time, or barely for my appearance on Question Time, Alison's being very, very generous, but many, many, many emails from people really praising Alison's interview with Ayaan Hirsi Ali. And of course, you can catch up with that on the Planet Normal archive. Email of the week. Why don't we go for Gary, who's given Bob the Bard a run for his money? Gary, send us an email to planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk. Put mug winner in the subject heading, send us your postal address, and we will send you a Planet Normal mug.
If you enjoy Planet Normal, we're doing our best. Please subscribe to this podcast. Well, I am.
Harsh.
Halligan does his best. He's moonlighting now. He's moonlighting on the BBC. Anyway, leave us a rating and a review on Spotify, the podcast app, or wherever you listen. It does help other people to find us so the wonderful, sane Planet Normal family can prosper and grow.
As we speed away from our beloved Planet Normal, the madness of planet Earth comes back into view. Thanks as ever to our brilliant producers Isabel Bouchard, Cass Ho and Louisa Wells. Stay safe and in touch with us and with each other. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.